What would you do if the seat you paid for, the one printed clearly on your ticket, was suddenly taken away? What if a stranger in a polished suit slid into your place, and the crew told you, not him, to move? And what if you were asked to step down, not because of rules or errors, but because of how you looked? This isn't just an ordinary flight story. It's the story of Selena Moreau, a woman who carried quiet power in her heart and legal power in her hands. On a Silver Wing Airlines flight from Atlanta to London, she was told to give up her business class seat to a white businessman. She complied outwardly, but what no one in that cabin knew was that Selena owned nearly half the parent company of the airline itself. From humiliation at 35,000 feet to a boardroom earthquake that would shake the aviation industry worldwide. This story asks the deepest question: how far can one person's dignity ripple? Stay with us until the end, because this is more than a story. It's a turning point. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss stories that reveal truth, justice, and the fight for respect. Selena Moreau pressed her palm lightly against the cool edge of the armrest, feeling the leather beneath her skin. Row 3A, business class, window seat, the place she had chosen days ago when booking her ticket to London. A seat that promised quiet, a stretch of sky, and the dignity she had earned after decades of building herself into someone who belonged here. But the illusion of belonging cracked the moment a flight attendant appeared at her side. The woman's uniform was crisp, her smile professional, but her tone was mechanical, stripped of empathy. "Excuse me, ma'am. We'll need you to move to economy." Selena blinked slowly, unsure if she had heard correctly. "I'm sorry." Another shadow loomed, a tall white man in a tailored gray suit. A hint of cologne trailed with him as he stopped at the row. His boarding pass was already in his hand, held up like evidence in a trial. "This is my seat, 3A, he said, confident, almost bored. Selena looked at him, then back at the attendant. She reached calmly into her bag and pulled out her own pass. With 2 fingers, she handed it over. "This says 3A. My name is on it." The attendant compared the tickets. Her lips pressed tight. For a brief second, Selena thought reason would prevail. But then the attendant turned toward the man. "Mr. Hale, please take your seat. We'll reassign her." Selena's chest rose, then stilled. The noise of passengers boarding, the shuffle of feet, the squeak of luggage wheels, it all seemed to fade into a hollow silence. Only her own heartbeat thudded in her ears. "I paid for this seat," Selena said evenly. Her voice did not rise. Years of boardroom battles had taught her that power was not in volume, but in control. The man in the suit, Martin Hale, she'd later learn his name, gave a casual shrug, as though her protest were a minor inconvenience. "I always book 3A. It's my spot." Selena met his gaze, calm but unyielding. "So do I." For a long moment, no one moved. The line of boarding passengers slowed. A ripple of curiosity spread as heads tilted, eyes lingered, and whispers stirred. Then the purser arrived. Ethan Drake, tall, authoritative, with a voice that carried the weight of finality. "Policy allows us to reassign seats when necessary," he said, as though quoting scripture. Selena's lips parted just slightly. Under what clause crew discretion? Ethan replied, clipped and vague. Her hand tightened against the armrest. Anger burned beneath her ribs, begging for release. But outwardly she remained composed. She had learned long ago that in moments like this, rage was the weapon of the powerless. Control was the weapon of those who planned to win. She reached for her bag, stood slowly, and drew herself to her full height. Then, loud enough for everyone in the nearby rows to hear. She said, "I am moving seats under formal protest." The words landed like stones in the quiet aisle. Passengers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to unease. Selina stepped aside. Martin Hale slid smoothly into 3A, exhaling with relief as though the matter had been resolved. He adjusted his tie, placed his bag in the overhead bin, and sank into the seat without offering so much as a glance of acknowledgement. Selina walked down the aisle toward economy. Each step felt like passing under a spotlight. The once soft, golden lighting of business class seemed harsher now, exposing every stare, every assumption etched into the faces she passed. Some looked away quickly. Others watched with open interest, as though her humiliation were an unexpected form of entertainment. She reached her reassigned seat in Economy 17B, a middle seat. The leather was cracked, the overhead lights a cold fluorescent white. She slid into the space, pressed between a man who immediately claimed both armrests and a woman with warm brown eyes, who offered a faint, sympathetic smile. "What they did to you was wrong," the woman whispered softly. Selina gave a small nod. Her throat tightened, but she refused to let the words rise. Not here. Not yet. Instead, she pulled her laptop from her bag. She opened it, the soft glow of the screen reflecting against her face. She pretended to review slides for her presentation in London, but the truth was, she couldn't focus on the words. Her mind was a storm. She thought of the check-in counter earlier that afternoon, when Lydia Shaw had glanced at her ticket and pointed her toward the economy line without even looking at the details. She thought of the gate agent, Ryan Cooper, who scrutinized her platinum membership card as if it might be counterfeit. She thought of Clara Voss, the lead flight attendant, who had walked past her 3 times without offering the welcome champagne that every other passenger received. It was all a pattern. Little cuts, small dismissals, and now, this the final blow, delivered in public view. For years, she had worn patience like armor, but as she sat in the cramped seat, the hum of the engines growing louder, she felt the weight of every silent battle pressing down on her chest. Should she confront them now, reveal who she was, expose the truth that she was not just another passenger, but one of the most powerful women connected to this airline? Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. No, not yet. Timing mattered. Justice was not just about being right, it was about being strategic. Selina took a slow breath, steadied her hands, and began to type. She opened a blank document and started recording everything: names, times, exact words. She would remember each detail, not as an angry passenger, but as someone who knew the power of documentation. The man beside her coughed, shifted, and encroached further into her space. She didn't move. She let him take the armrest. Some battles were too small to waste energy on. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the engines drown out the sting of humiliation. She imagined the horizon waiting beyond the clouds. London, a meeting worth billions, a room where her voice would carry weight measured not in sympathy, but in numbers that reshaped markets. Yet even that thought could not erase the image of her seat, her rightful seat now occupied by someone who believed he had a greater claim. When she opened her eyes again, she saw her reflection faintly in the dark screen of the seat back ahead. Her face was calm, her gaze steady, and in the silence of her own mind, she whispered a promise. This is not over. The golden light from Newport International Airport's glass ceiling filtered through the atrium as Selina Moreau wheeled her Navy carry-on across the polished floor. The hum of travelers blended with the occasional announcement echoing overhead. Families shuffled with strollers. Business travelers hurried with phones pressed to ears, and students dragged backpacks bigger than their frames. Selina moved with a deliberate calm. Her tailored navy suit, pressed to perfection, hugged her frame without excess. A soft silk blouse added warmth to her professional edge. She carried herself with the ease of someone accustomed to airports, but beneath that ease was calculation. Every movement, every look, every pause was measured. Her destination was the premium check-in counter, marked by a sleek silver sign. The carpet there was thicker, the line shorter. She approached, placing her platinum tier card and her business class ticket neatly on the counter. Behind the desk, a young blonde woman looked up. Lydia Shaw, 24 at most. The scripted smile she wore faltered the moment her eyes flicked across Selina's face. The hesitation was subtle, almost imperceptible. But Selina caught it. She had caught it all her life. "The economy counter is over there." "Ma'am," Lydia said, pointing toward the snaking line in the distance. She hadn't even glanced at the ticket. Selina let the silence linger for a beat. Then she smiled faintly. The kind of smile she often used in boardrooms when an underprepared associate made a careless mistake. Calm, restrained, but edged with quiet authority. "I'm flying business class," Selina replied, sliding the ticket and ID closer across the counter. Lydia blinked, as though surprised. Her hand hovered awkwardly before she finally picked up the documents. She scanned them, the flicker of unease visible on her face. Still, no apology, only the stiff, mechanical act of printing a boarding pass and sliding it back as though nothing had happened. Selina accepted it without comment. She had endured worse than a young woman's prejudice disguised as procedure, but even as she walked away, the moment clung to her, like an ink stain that refused to fade. The VIP lounge awaited behind frosted glass doors. As she approached, a man in a navy vest stepped forward to block her way. Derek Mullen, the lounge gate attendant. He lifted his chin slightly, his tone slow and deliberate, as though speaking to a child. "Sorry, this area is for business class passengers and platinum members." Selina presented both her card and ticket, holding them with steady hands. "As you can see, I qualify for both." Derek took them, his eyes narrowing. He inspected the details as though searching for a forgery. Seconds stretched long. Finally, he handed them back. "Just following procedure," he said, voice low, layered with implication. "We get people trying to sneak in." The words landed heavy. Selina did not flinch, but inside her chest a familiar ache bloomed. The kind that came not from surprise, but from repetition. The same song played in 100 variations over the years, always with the same refrain. She walked past him into the lounge. The carpet was plush, the lighting warm, but the chill in Derek's gaze lingered like frost. She chose a quiet corner near a wall of glass overlooking the runway. Aircraft glided by, their silver bodies gleaming against the afternoon sky. Opening her laptop, she pulled up her investor presentation for London. The deal was massive. $2.3 billion. Numbers that could ripple through markets and alter the fate of industries. But her mind kept drifting back to the interactions she had just endured. Lydia's dismissive gesture, Derek's slow suspicion, the subtle message that no matter what her ticket or her status declared, she did not belong. She closed her eyes briefly, pressing her fingertips together. Should she address it now? Call a manager, raise her voice. The thought surfaced, but she let it drift away. Not yet. There would be a time. There was always a time. If one was patient enough to seize it, boarding was announced. Business class first. Selina gathered her things and approached the gate. Ryan Cooper scanned her boarding pass, his hand pausing just slightly before he handed it back. "Ah, yes," he said, hesitation flickering in his eyes. "Go ahead. 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds." But enough for Selina to register the unspoken message. Doubt still lingered. She stepped onto the jet bridge, the air cooler and laced with the scent of jet fuel. Inside the cabin, she found seat 3A, stowed her laptop overhead, and sat by the window. The leather seat embraced her, but even here she felt the echo of those moments, the gazes, the words, the reminders. Clara Voss, the lead flight attendant, walked past her 3 times. Champagne flutes glimmered in her tray, offered to each passenger in business class, but never to Selina. Selina pressed the call button. Clara appeared, her tone flat. "Is there a problem? I'd like the business class welcome drink as per standard service." Clara hesitated, then disappeared. Minutes later she returned, but instead of champagne, she handed Selina a cold glass of orange juice. The strained smile on her face only deepened the insult. Selina accepted it without a word. She lifted the glass, its condensation damp against her fingertips, and took a slow sip. The bitterness of the juice spread across her tongue, sharper than usual. She set it down carefully, her expression unreadable. Inside, however, the conflict raged. Should she demand fairness, confront Claire in front of the others, or should she stay silent, bide her time, and let the weight of her silence grow until it could no longer be ignored? Her father's voice echoed in memory. "Patience is not weakness. Selina, patience is the art of winning twice, once when you endure, and once when you respond." She drew a deep breath and settled back into her seat. Outside, the runway stretched long and endless. Beyond it, the horizon waited, but the shadows of the check-in, the gate, and the cabin had already set the stage. This was no longer a flight. It was a proving ground, and Selina Moreau, though quiet for now, was already preparing her case. The cabin was alive with the sound of settling passengers, the rustle of coats being folded, the click of seatbelts, the soft pop of champagne corks. Business class had an atmosphere of polished calm, like a hotel lobby suspended in the sky. Selina Moreau sat in 3A, the window seat she had chosen carefully. She adjusted the fold of her blazer, opened her laptop on the tray table, and tried to sink into the pre-flight rhythm. The muted hum of the air vents, the faint scent of citrus from her own hand lotion, the low buzz of conversation from across the aisle. Yet the memory of orange juice still lingered, a deliberate slight, tucked behind a smile. She closed her eyes briefly, fighting the familiar sting of being underestimated, then turned her focus to the slides on her screen. London, a presentation that could shift billions. She needed clarity. The relief lasted less than a minute. Footsteps approached, measured and purposeful. Selina looked up to find a man in a gray suit standing before her row. He was middle-aged, his hair neatly combed, his tie a perfect Windsor knot. The confidence in his stance told her this was a man who believed the world owed him space. "I think you're in my seat," he said casually, holding up his boarding pass. 3A. Selina blinked once, then turned her laptop so the light wouldn't glare against the screen. She reached calmly for her own ticket, resting in the seat-back pocket, and handed it to him. "This says 3A. My name is on it." The man's lips pursed in impatience. "Mine clearly says the same." I always book this seat. The word struck her like a slap. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. The entitlement. The assumption. Selina met his eyes. Her voice was level, steady, without a trace of apology. So do I. For a moment, silence hung between them. Other passengers began glancing over, curiosity stirring. A man in 3B lowered his newspaper, watching. A woman in 4C adjusted her headphones but didn't put them on, listening instead. The man lifted his chin and gestured toward a flight attendant walking by. "Excuse me. Could you come here? Clara Voss arrived." Her expression cool. She glanced at the boarding passes, then back at Selina. The pause was barely a second, but Selina felt it. Claire's decision was already made. "Miss Moreau," Clara said, her tone clipped. "Could you move to economy? We'll refund the difference." Selina's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "No, I booked this seat for a reason, and I have important business in London." The man gave a short laugh, impatient and dismissive. "So do I. I have a meeting right after landing." The tension in the cabin thickened. Whispers grew louder. The curtain at the front shifted as another member of the crew entered. The purser, Ethan Drake, arrived with the confidence of someone used to ending disputes. He carried authority in his posture, his voice calm but firm. "Policy allows us to reassign seats when necessary," he declared. Selina tilted her head slightly. Under what clause? Ethan's eyes hardened. Crew discretion. Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained even. "I have paid in full. My seat was confirmed. If you intend to reassign it, I want the reason stated clearly." Ethan glanced at Clara. Clara glanced at the man. The chain of loyalty was visible, and Selina recognized it instantly. It wasn't about policy. It was about preference. The whispers grew louder. A man in 2D leaned into the aisle, his phone half raised, as though tempted to record. A young woman across the cabin mouthed the words, "This isn't right," to her companion. Selina inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She could feel her heart pressing against her ribs, the urge to lash out building like a storm. But she had learned long ago that her calm was more powerful than any outburst. She rose, collected her bag from beneath the seat, and straightened her blazer. Then, with her voice clear enough to carry across the cabin, she said, "I am moving seats under formal protest." The words cut through the murmurs. Passengers turned, eyebrows raised, phones tilted higher. The act of moving was humiliating, but the phrase formal protest turned it into something else. Not surrender, a record, a marker. Selina walked the length of the business cabin. Each step felt like walking under a spotlight, her every movement observed, judged, interpreted. She kept her spine straight, her eyes forward. The curtain at the end of the cabin parted, and she stepped into economy. Her new seat was 17B, wedged between a broad-shouldered man who claimed both armrests and a woman whose eyes carried sympathy. The woman leaned closer, her voice low. "What they did to you was wrong." Selina gave a slight nod. She set her laptop on the tray table and opened it. But instead of reviewing her slides, she created a new document. She typed the names: Clara Voss, Ethan Drake, Lydia Shaw, Derek Mullen. She added the exact words, the times, the sequence of events. Her fingers moved quickly, each keystroke like laying a brick in the foundation of something larger. A man cleared his throat beside her, shifting into her space. She ignored it. The discomfort of a cramped seat was temporary. What she was building on her screen was not. Her mind churned with questions. Should she reveal who she was now? Should she call Aurelia Group's executive line mid-air? Unleash the weight of her authority before they even reach cruising altitude? She closed her eyes, hearing again the echo of her father's words. Patience is not weakness. Patience is the art of winning twice. Selina opened her eyes, her expression calm once more. She would wait. She would watch. And when the moment came, she would strike with precision. Outside the window, the runway stretched endlessly. The engines roared, the cabin shuddered, and the aircraft began its ascent. Selina's seat was smaller, tighter, less dignified, but the truth was simple. They had pushed her into economy, not knowing the true power had just followed them there. The engine steadied into their climb, pressing passengers gently back against their seats. The seatbelt sign glowed amber above the narrow aisle. Selina Moreau sat rigid in 17B, the dull hum of the aircraft vibrating through her armrest. The man beside her shifted, his elbow intruding further into her space, but she didn't move. Her focus wasn't on him. Her laptop glowed faintly in the dimmed cabin, its light illuminating the calm resolve on her face. On screen, a growing list of names and details unfolded times, words spoken, the order of events. Every keystroke was deliberate, clinical, stripped of emotion. Facts were harder to argue with than feelings. The woman in 70A leaned slightly closer, speaking over the noise of the engines. "I don't know who you are," she said softly, "but I know what I saw. They treated you unfairly." Selina turned her head and studied the woman's expression. Compassion, curiosity, but no pity. Pity was intolerable. Compassion she could accept. "Thank you," Selina replied. Her tone was even, but her chest tightened with something unsaid. The boy in row 18 began to cry. His mother fussed over him, whispering comfort. Selina noticed the empty tray on her lap, the disappointment etched in the child's face. A missing meal, a small slight, but one she recognized as part of a bigger pattern. She stood quietly, sliding past her roommate, and walked forward through the cabin. Curtains separated economy from business, but as she approached, Clara Voss appeared, blocking the passage. "Where are you going?" Clara's voice carried that same clipped tone, as though Selina were a child caught out of place. "A child's meal is missing in economy," Selina said calmly. "I came to see if any spares remain in business." "Policy doesn't allow transferring meals between cabins," Clara said quickly, her eyes narrowing. Selina held her gaze. Section 12. And 6 of the in-flight service manual permits it if there's surplus stock and the passenger is under 12. Clara froze for a second, her eyes flicking away. The hesitation was enough. She returned to the galley, opened a drawer, and handed Selina a tray reluctantly. "Thank you," Selina said, her tone soft but edged with steel. She held Clara's gaze for an extra beat before turning back. When she delivered the meal to the boy in row 18, his eyes lit up, and his mother whispered a grateful thank you. The moment was small, but it resonated deeply. Selina felt the weight of it settle into her chest. Service wasn't just policy, it was dignity. And dignity wasn't something you denied on a whim. Back in 17B, she reopened her laptop. Her fingers flew, adding new notes. She described Clara's hesitation, the reference to the manual, the sequence of resistance before compliance. Each observation sharpened the narrative she was building. The man beside her sighed loudly, annoyed by her movements. She ignored him. The seat was cramped, the air thicker back here, but Selina knew it was exactly where she needed to be. This wasn't humiliation. It was positioning. The intercom crackled. Ethan Drake's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached cruising altitude. You may now use approved electronic devices in airplane mode." Selena's lips curved into the faintest smile. Airplane mode was no obstacle. She opened a secure satellite app embedded in her executive system. Her screen blinked, and the Aurelia Group crest appeared. With 3 swift taps, she initiated a call to the board's private channel. "Allison," she said, her voice low but firm when the board secretary's face appeared. "Connect me directly to the executive board, right now, legal included." Within minutes, 6 faces filled her screen. Victor Hahn, the CFO. Evelyn Price, Chief Legal Officer. 3 other directors. And Allison, steady as always. Selena outlined everything, from Lydia Shaw's dismissive finger pointing at check-in, to Derek Mullen's suspicious inspection at the lounge, to Clara and Ethan forcing her from her confirmed seat. She recited the clauses violated with precision. Clause 4.2, confirmed seating. Clause 6.1, no discrimination. Clause 8.4, complaint resolution. Victor frowned. "You want to act while still airborne?" Selena leaned closer to the camera. Her eyes were steady, her voice clear. "I want everyone in business class to know exactly what they've done, and I want the crew to know consequences are already moving. Before we land." Evelyn's head tilted slightly. She began drafting, her fingers moving fast. Ground Ethan Drake and Clara Voss upon arrival. Suspend Lydia Shaw and Derek Mullen pending investigation. I'll notify PR to prepare a holding statement in case of leaks. Selena ended the call, shut her laptop slowly, and took a breath. She let the moment wash over her. It had begun. Action was already flowing downward, like an electric current racing toward the cabin crew who still believed themselves untouchable. Through the small gap in the curtain, Selena caught sight of Martin Hale, the man in her seat sipping champagne, laughing with Clara. She lifted her phone and snapped 2 photos, not for social media, for evidence, for leverage. Minutes later, Clara passed through economy, her tray rattling faintly. Her eyes landed briefly on Selena's laptop. The Aurelia Group logo glowed in the corner of the screen. For half a second, recognition flickered in her eyes. Suspicion, fear. Then she turned away quickly. Selena knew that look well. The first spark of realization, the dawning sense that they had miscalculated. But she let the curtain fall back into place. Let them stew. The flight stretched on. The lights dimmed to a softer hue as hours passed. Passengers shifted into sleep. Selena, however, remained alert. She worked on her notes, refined her timeline, and replayed the exchanges in her mind. Each detail mattered. She thought about her father again, his lessons in restraint. She thought about her mother, who once told her, "The truest justice doesn't come from raising your voice. It comes from making sure no one can look away from the truth." By the time the cabin lights brightened for descent, Selena had built a record too complete to ignore. Every word, every act, every violation was there. Her phone buzzed. A message from Allison appeared. Directive executed. Crew held upon landing. PR prepared. Board notified. Selena closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. The rhythm of the engines pulsed steady beneath her. She had been forced into economy, but she had never once lost control. And when the plane touched down, the reckoning would begin. The aircraft glided steady at 37,000 feet, slicing through clouds like a silver blade. The cabin lights had dimmed to a muted glow, casting soft shadows across the aisles. Passengers settled into their meals or reclined with headphones. unaware that the atmosphere surrounding rows 3 and 17 was shifting by the minute. Selina Moreau sat calmly in her cramped economy seat, her posture straight despite the lack of space. Her laptop was closed now, resting on the tray table. She had all the information she needed, all the leverage prepared. There was no need to press further. The silence was part of her strategy. She wanted them to wonder. She wanted them to stew in uncertainty. Up front, Clara Voss whispered to Ethan Drake in the galley, her voice sharp but hushed. She had the Aurelia Group portal open. I saw it. Ethan frowned. His jaw tightened as he glanced over his shoulder toward the curtain that separated the cabins. Are you sure I know the logo when I see it? Clara snapped. What if She stopped herself. The thought was too dangerous to finish. Ethan rubbed his forehead. A bead of sweat formed despite the cool air. If she is who I think she might be, we're in trouble. Serious trouble. Martin Hale, lounging in 3A with his tie loosened, noticed their hushed tones. He set his champagne flute down, his smile faltering. What's going on? Claire forced a quick laugh, waving it off. Nothing. Sir? Just service logistics. But Martin wasn't convinced. He leaned back, suddenly uneasy. He replayed the earlier moment in his mind the way Selina had looked at him when she surrendered the seat. Not defeated, not humiliated, but deliberate, almost as if she were letting him dig his own grave. In row 17, Selina caught the faintest glimpse of Ethan peeking through the curtain. Their eyes met briefly. He looked away first. That was all the confirmation she needed. They knew, or at least they suspected. The woman in 7A, Gabriela Ortiz, whispered again. I can feel it. The whole crew's acting strange. Who are you? Selina turned, her voice calm but layered with weight. Someone they underestimated. Gabriela blinked, processing the answer, then gave a small nod. She didn't press further. Sometimes silence revealed more than explanation. The tension seeped into business class. Service slowed. Clara's confident stride became clipped, cautious. Ethan's instructions were quieter, measured. Passengers noticed the change. A few whispered among themselves. Something was off, though none could place it. Martin shifted in his seat, fiddling with his watch. He overheard a muttered word from a junior attendant who thought she was out of earshot. Shareholder. The single word hit him like ice water. He straightened, his palms damp. He had read about strategic shareholders of Aurelia Group. They were untouchable, powerful enough to sway entire boards. If Selina was one of them. His stomach tightened. The hours dragged forward, but the cabin never settled into true calm. Every glance between crew members carried tension. Every time Selina adjusted her laptop or checked her phone, she saw the ripple of unease run down the aisle like a current. Finally, Ethan mustered his courage. He walked back, stopping by her row. His tone carried forced diplomacy. Miss Moreau, we would be happy to return you to your original seat in business class, if you'd like. Selina closed her tablet slowly, her gaze rising to meet his. The calm in her eyes unnerved him more than any raised voice could have. No, she said softly, yet firmly. I will remain where you placed me. That way, no one forgets where and how this happened. Ethan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Is there anything else we can do for your comfort? Yes, Selina replied. A written incident report, signed by you and Ms. Voss, detailing every action taken before takeoff. The request made Ethan falter. Regulations didn't require such a thing, but shareholder law was another matter. He stammered, I will consider it. Selina tilted her head, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Consider it carefully." Ethan's face flushed. He nodded stiffly and retreated, nearly bumping into a passenger in the aisle. Gabriella exhaled beside her, whispering, "You don't even have to raise your voice. They're terrified." Selina didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than outrage ever could. In the galley. Claire cornered Ethan again, her voice frantic. "She's not just a passenger. Ethan, she's someone important. I'm telling you. I saw that system. If she reports us, if she files something, Ethan, cut her off. Keep your voice down. We'll deal with this when we land." But his tone carried no conviction. He knew the decision was already out of their hands. The rest of the flight played out in a tense quiet. Martin stopped making small talk with attendants. Claire avoided passing through economy again. Ethan kept glancing at the seat map, his hand running through his hair till it stood on end. Selina, meanwhile, was calm. She sipped water, answered a few emails, and even closed her eyes for a short rest. Outwardly serene, inwardly, she was sharpening her blade. Every minute brought them closer to landing, closer to accountability. As the plane began its slow descent, the captain's voice filled the speakers, but his tone was unusually formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, please be advised. Upon landing, a VIP passenger will disembark first. We ask for your cooperation." The announcement sent a murmur through the cabin. Passengers looked around curiously, trying to guess who the VIP might be. Martin felt sweat bead on his forehead. He knew it wasn't him. A cold dread coiled in his gut. Selina simply straightened her blazer, closing her tablet with a quiet click. The time for patience was ending. The time for truth was almost here. When the wheels touched the runway, the engines roared in reverse, the cabin jolted, and Selina's eyes opened with clarity. She had endured. She had documented. She had waited. Now, the reckoning would begin at the very moment the doors opened. The landing gear thudded against the tarmac with a jolt that rippled through the cabin. A chorus of gasps, the rattle of overhead bins, and the low whine of reverse thrust filled the air. For most passengers, it was routine. For Selina Moreau, it was the sound of a stage curtain lifting. The plane slowed, rolling along the runway until it turned onto the taxiway. Outside, Heathrow's sprawling lights glittered like a city of stars, welcoming travelers from every corner of the globe. Inside, however, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension. Selina sat poised in 17B, her seatbelt already fastened tightly, her hands resting lightly on her closed laptop. Gabriela Ortiz, still beside her, cast nervous glances toward the front of the cabin. "I don't know what's about to happen," she whispered, "but I feel like this flight is going to be remembered for a long time." Selina allowed herself a faint smile. "You're right about that." The captain's voice came over the intercom, more formal than it had been at takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be arriving at the gate shortly. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign has been turned off. As a reminder, a VIP passenger will be escorted from the aircraft first." The words fell like a stone into the silence. Martin Hale's stomach churned in 3A. He tugged at his tie, suddenly suffocated by the silk knot. He knew the announcement had nothing to do with him, though he wished desperately that it did. Clara Voss stood rigid in the galley, her knuckles pale around the handle of the beverage cart. Ethan Drake leaned against the bulkhead, his breathing shallow. The Airbus A350 rolled to a gentle stop at the gate. The familiar ding of the seatbelt sign turning off sounded. But no one rose. An unspoken weight held everyone in place. Then the door opened. Cold night air swept inside, carrying with it the murmur of voices from the jet bridge. Selina rose slowly, her movements deliberate, each gesture calculated. She slid her laptop into her bag, straightened her blazer, and lifted the handle of her suitcase. The soft click of the wheels against the aisle floor echoed louder than footsteps in a cathedral. Every eye followed her. From row 2 to row 42, passengers turned, watching as the woman who had been quietly relegated to economy now walked with the grace of someone approaching a tribunal. Gabriella whispered, almost reverently, "They don't even know what's about to hit them." Selina's pace was steady, unhurried. She passed Martin Hale without a glance. He kept his eyes down, fumbling with the clasp of his briefcase as though it required urgent attention. His hands trembled so badly he could barely close it. At the threshold of the door, a group of 4 figures awaited her. Leading them was Martin Hale, Aurelia's European Regional Director. His expression was grave, carved into lines of formality. Behind him stood 2 members of the legal department and a young assistant holding a notepad with a mounted body camera recording the encounter. "Ms. Moreau," Martin said, extending his hand. His voice carried both deference and unease. Selina gave a brief nod, ignoring the hand. "Director Hale." The assistant's camera blinked red. Evidence was being gathered. Formality documented. This was no casual apology. This was procedure at the highest level. "We apologize for the incident on this flight," Martin began, his words rehearsed. "The leadership team has been informed," and Selina cut him off, her voice sharp yet composed. "Not an incident. Systemic discrimination. I have preserved all evidence, including specific violations of Aurelia Group's passenger rights policy. Sections 4.2, 6.1, and 8.4. I expect your written account to reflect every word precisely." The legal officer standing behind Martin shifted uneasily, her pen hovering above her pad. The weight of Selina's words was undeniable. Passengers craned their necks from the cabin, straining to hear. Some whispered, some recorded. What was unfolding at the aircraft door felt historic, a moment when private injustice collided with public reckoning. Selina stepped onto the jet bridge, flanked by the executives. Her heels clicked against the metal floor, each step steady, echoing like the drumbeat of a verdict. The crowd of reporters waiting at the terminal end surged forward, cameras flashing in a violent strobe. She paused, turning slightly toward them. Flashes illuminated her face, each one capturing the calm resolve in her expression. "Today," Selina said clearly, her voice cutting through the noise, "I was treated like a second-class passenger on an airline owned by the very corporation I help govern. This is not just my story. It is the story of anyone who has ever been judged by the color of their skin, their gender, or their appearance, and I will ensure this system changes." The crowd erupted, microphones thrust closer, questions volleyed from every direction. What happened on the flight? Will the crew face suspension? Do you plan to sue? Selina gave no further answers. Instead, she allowed the silence to build, her refusal to be pulled into chaos reinforcing the gravity of her earlier statement. The executives guided her into a nearby conference room, away from the flashing cameras. Inside, the air was tense, the atmosphere clinical. A round table dominated the room, documents already spread across its surface. William Cross, the airline CEO, sat in a corner seat. His suit was pressed, but his eyes were sunken with exhaustion. He had been suspended only hours earlier by emergency vote, but he clung to presence like a man clinging to a sinking raft. When Selina entered, The room shifted. Everyone rose except for Cross. He remained seated, his jaw tight, his pen spinning anxiously between his fingers. Selina sat opposite him, setting her handbag on the table with quiet finality. She didn't bring a stack of papers or a laptop. She didn't need to. Everything she required was already secured digitally, backed by timestamps, recordings, and witness statements. "I will be brief," she began, her voice calm but resonant. 4 employees violated both company protocol and corporate law. Clara Voss and Ethan Drake abused reassignment authority to favor a passenger. Lydia Shaw and Derek Mullen denied me equal access at check-in and in the lounge. Martin Hale, she glanced deliberately at the list before continuing, was the direct beneficiary of this misconduct. She paused, letting the silence bite. The weight of her words hung in the air, undeniable, inescapable. My evidence is thorough. Photos, audio, witness statements, every detail logged and time-stamped. Cross tried to interrupt, his voice strained. "Carter," he caught himself, realizing too late he had used her surname with a dismissive edge. "Ms. Moreau, perhaps this is being escalated too far. We can manage this internally without making a spectacle." Selina leaned forward, her eyes sharp as steel. Reputation is not a figure you edit in a quarterly report. When passengers lose trust, the market loses trust. And when the market loses trust, this airline will bleed value faster than any balance sheet can mask. The room went still. Even Martin Hale, hardened from years of corporate crises, looked down at his notes, unwilling to meet her gaze. Selina continued. Under Clause 14.3 of the Corporate Shareholder Agreement, any act causing significant harm to the corporation's reputation or to the rights of a strategic shareholder demands immediate suspension or termination of those responsible. I am formally invoking that clause. The legal officer beside Martin Hale placed a thick file on the table. Its cover bore the Aurelia Group logo and the words "Immediate Action Required." Board member Evelyn Price, seated near the end, spoke up. Her tone was decisive. "I support immediate action. If we delay, the media storm will grow unmanageable. We need transparency, accountability, and proof that systemic discrimination will not be tolerated." The gavel-like sound of a pen tapping against the table sealed the matter. Cross's shoulders sagged. He had lost. Selina reclined slightly in her chair, her composure unbroken. This is not about a spectacle. It is about principle. And principles, once broken, must be repaired publicly. The directives were read aloud. Suspension of the crew, launch of an independent investigation, immediate restructuring of service authority, establishment of a $10 million fairness fund to support passengers facing discrimination in aviation. Selina nodded once, her expression unreadable. The foundations of reform had been laid, and the first cracks in the old culture had been forced open. But as she rose from the table and walked toward the door, she knew this was only the beginning. What happened next would determine not just the fate of a single airline, but the future of how passengers around the world would be treated. The doors of the conference center swung open, and a flood of cameras flashed like lightning across a stormy sky. The air buzzed with tension. Journalists from CNN, BBC, Reuters, and Al Jazeera jostled for position, their microphones raised like a forest of steel stalks. It wasn't every day that a major airline faced an emergency press conference in London, and certainly not one prompted by allegations involving systemic discrimination against one of its own strategic shareholders. Selina Moreau stepped onto the stage with the poise of someone who had rehearsed this moment her entire life. Dressed in a tailored ivory suit, her hair pulled back neatly, she carried no notes, No podium-thumping speeches, only her presence. Behind her. The Aurelia Group insignia glowed faintly on a massive screen. At her side stood Evelyn Price, Chief Legal Officer, and Martin Hale, the European Regional Director, both looking far less composed. The crowd hushed as Selina approached the microphones. She paused, letting the silence expand, letting anticipation peak until the room itself seemed to lean forward. "I am not here to tell you only a personal story," she began, her voice clear, deliberate, each syllable carrying weight. "I am here to speak about a system. Today, on Silverwing Airlines Flight 726, I was removed from my confirmed business class seat in favor of another passenger. I was downgraded, disregarded, and dismissed. Not because of a ticketing error, not because of a safety issue, but because I did not fit the image of who belonged there." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, freezing her words in frames that would circle the globe within minutes. "This is not just about me," Selina continued. "This is about every passenger who has ever been judged by their appearance, their accent, or the assumptions of someone in a uniform. And it is about whether an airline, any airline, can claim to stand for fairness if it allows bias to dictate who deserves respect." Reporters scribbled furiously, some typing directly into live feeds. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags before she even finished her sentence. Flyfare? Selina Moreau. Silver Wing Scandal. Selina lifted her chin slightly. Atlantic Aviation has long prided itself on progress, but progress means nothing if it crumbles in the hands of prejudice. Therefore, starting today, Aurelia Group will implement immediate measures. 4. To be precise, 1 mandatory training for every frontline employee on anti-discrimination and equitable service. 2. An independent complaint unit reporting directly to the board of directors, not management. 3. Public disclosure of violations and disciplinary actions. And 4. The creation of a $10 million fairness fund to support passengers who face discrimination in aviation. Her voice lowered, resonant, almost solemn. Fair service is not a courtesy. It is a condition of survival. For this company. For this industry. Applause erupted, uncharacteristic for a press conference. Several journalists rose to their feet. Clapping, cameras zoomed in on Selina's calm expression, her steady gaze. It was not the anger of a victim, but the resolve of a reformer. As the applause faded, questions shot forward. "Ms. Moreau, do you intend to file legal action? Will crew members be terminated? Is this an isolated case or part of a wider pattern?" Selina allowed Evelyn Price to field the procedural answers. Evelyn's crisp tone outlined the investigation, suspensions, and commitment to transparency. But every time Evelyn finished, the cameras returned to Selina, as if the world had already decided who the true authority in the room was. Meanwhile, in living rooms across America, families watched in disbelief as the story broke on primetime television. On social media, clips of Selina's speech were shared with captions like, "This is history in the making, and she turned humiliation into revolution." Within hours, one time, Flyfare trended across continents, from New York to Nairobi. But the backlash was just as fierce. On conservative networks, commentators called it an overreaction, a shareholder flexing power for personal gain. A pundit sneered, "So now airlines have to run every decision by billionaires." The tension was palpable, polarizing, but the numbers told their own story. Silver Wing's parent company, Aurelia Group, saw its stock plunge 7% at market open. Traders scrambled, analysts debated. Was this the beginning of a free fall, or the kind of storm that could, paradoxically, Rebuild Stronger, inside the Aurelia War Room in New York. Chairman George Langford stood at the head of a long mahogany table. LED screens behind him replaying Selena's press conference in real time. He slammed his palm against the table. This is not just optics. This is survival. We must lean into her reforms. Half measures will kill us faster than the scandal itself. Victor Hahn, the CFO, pinched the bridge of his nose. We've already lost billions in market cap today. If investors see this as instability, George cut him off. Investors don't fear instability. They fear dishonesty. What Selena just gave us was not chaos. It was clarity, and clarity is what the market can recover on. Back in London, Selena retreated from the stage, escorted into a smaller media room where selected reporters had been granted exclusive interviews. She leaned back in her chair, taking a sip of water, her pulse steady. Internally, however, questions gnawed at her. Would this spark real change, or would it collapse into another wave of performative gestures, another corporate diversity campaign without teeth? Her mind flickered back to the flight, to the cold glass of orange juice placed before her instead of champagne. Such a small slight, yet symbolic of everything wrong. She remembered the way Clara Voss's lips had tightened, the condescension in Ethan Drake's voice, the suspicious squint of Lydia Shaw at the check-in desk. Each memory stung, but each also hardened her resolve. Gabriela Ortiz's words echoed too. What they did to you was wrong. That quiet affirmation had meant more than the corporate apologies now flooding her inbox. Change was not born from boardrooms. It was born from witnesses refusing to stay silent. As evening fell, outside the hotel where Selena was staying, protesters gathered with hastily printed signs. Fair skies now. Every passenger counts. No more silent cabins. Many had never met her, but they carried her message as their own. From her suite, Selena watched through the window, her reflection overlapping with the neon glow of their signs. Now she felt both the weight of expectation and the spark of solidarity. This was no longer her battle alone. Meanwhile, in an airport crew lounge at Heathrow, Clara Voss sat slumped in a chair, her uniform rumpled, her eyes red. Ethan Drake paced nervously beside her. "They'll make an example of us," he muttered. Clara didn't respond. She knew he was right. Their names were already trending on social media, paired with words like bias and disgrace. At that very moment, Selena's phone buzzed. A text from Allison Rowe, her board secretary. Directive executed. Crew suspended. PR rolling out revised statement tonight. Brace for global escalation. Selena set her phone down and let out a long, measured breath. She thought of her father, who had once told her, "When the world tries to shrink you, stand taller, even if it makes them uncomfortable." Tonight, those words lived through her, across news networks. Her face appeared again and again, framed by bold headlines. Strategic shareholder humiliated in airline discrimination scandal. Reforms announced mid-flight. The woman who turned 17B into a boardroom. For millions watching, she was not just a CEO or a shareholder. She was a symbol of dignity under fire. A reminder that one person's refusal to yield could spark a storm powerful enough to change an entire industry. And as the night deepened over London, Selena knew the battle had just shifted gears. The court of public opinion had opened its doors, and she was both plaintiff and judge. The storm did not wait for dawn. By the time the first light touched the glass towers of London, Selena Moreau's name had already traveled farther than the red-eyed jet still tracing contrails across the Atlantic. Clips of her press conference flooded TikTok and Twitter. Her steady voice spliced with captions like, "The woman who changed the skies," and "From 3A to the world stage." The backlash against Silverwing Airlines was ferocious. On Facebook, passengers recounted their own humiliations. One man wrote, "I was told my upgrade wasn't valid because they thought my ID was fake." Same airline. Same bias. A mother posted, "My teenage daughter was denied boarding because staff said she didn't look like her passport photo. We cried in the terminal within hours." Beamer Flyfair trended globally, reaching 72 million impressions before breakfast. Yet on the same digital tide, dissent brewed. Commentators on business networks accused Selena of weaponizing her shareholder status. One columnist sneered, "Would she have spoken up if she didn't own nearly half the airline's parent group?" The question, though shallow, found traction among skeptics who saw power plays rather than principle. Inside Silverwing's London headquarters, the atmosphere was taut as piano wire. In a staff lounge, flight attendants huddled around a television replaying Selena's press conference. Clara Voss's name scrolled across the ticker, suspended pending investigation. Gasps spread as Ethan Drake's face appeared on the screen. Someone muttered, "They're burning us alive to save face." Another countered, "Maybe it's about time." Division fractured the crew community. Younger attendants whispered about long-ignored biases, about times they'd been told to upgrade the regulars or look out for the right type of passengers. Senior staff pushed back, insisting loyalty meant standing by one another no matter what. That morning, the union office was flooded with calls. Some demanded protection for the suspended crew. Others demanded reform. The union itself split down the middle. Selena knew this fracture would be decisive. Reform couldn't survive without the rank and file. But neither could dignity endure if crew culture refused to change. She sat in her London hotel suite, scanning overnight reports, the glow of her tablet reflecting in her tired eyes. Lines of data scrolled past trending hashtags, stock performance, call center complaints. Yet one email held her attention longer than the rest. It was from a young flight attendant named Marcus Leung, Ms. Moreau. "I was on the same flight, but stationed in economy. I saw what happened. For years, many of us have been pressured to look the other way when bias shaped decisions. We were told to smile, obey, move on. Your stand gives me hope, but I fear the backlash will crush younger staff who try to follow your lead. Please don't let the company make us choose between silence and survival." Selena closed her eyes after reading it. She could feel Marcus's quiet desperation like a pulse through the words. She thought of her younger self, freshly out of Harvard, standing in boardrooms where she was mistaken for the assistant rather than the strategist. Silence had once been survival for her too, but silence was no longer enough. By midday, Silverwing Airlines had released a statement drafted hastily by the PR team without Selena's review. It began with sterile phrasing. "We regret any discomfort experienced by Ms. Moreau and are reviewing procedures." The internet pounced. Screenshots of the statement spread with captions like, "Discomfort. She was kicked out of her seat, and this is corporate gaslighting 101. Selena's phone rang. It was George Langford, the chairman. His voice was clipped. "Selena, we need you to approve the revised messaging. The board wants you to stand front and center." "Front and center is fine," she replied, "but I won't lend my voice to cowardice. The language must name the problem, not discomfort, discrimination." George hesitated. "That word carries liability." She leaned forward in her chair, her tone firm. "That word carries truth, And if we are afraid of truth, we don't deserve the passengers we claim to serve. By afternoon, a revised statement went out under Selena's name. It was concise, but unflinching. Today, Silverwing Airlines acknowledges systemic discrimination occurred against one of its passengers, who also happens to be a shareholder. We will act transparently and decisively. We owe that to every traveler, not just one. The effect was immediate. Media outlets replayed the word systemic like a drumbeat. Critics who had dismissed her as self-interested struggled to counter a message that embraced responsibility rather than deflection. The airline's stock, though still bruised, began to stabilize. Yet inside the company, revolt stirred. Managers complained the new reporting requirements were micromanagement. Crew supervisors whispered that Selena was dismantling decades of hierarchy overnight. Even Evelyn Price, her steadfast ally, warned during an evening strategy call. Expect sabotage. Change this fast will ignite resistance. Selena listened quietly, then spoke. If resistance comes, let it surface. Sunlight will burn away the mold faster than compromise. That night, she prepared for a televised interview with the BBC. The host began sharply, Ms. Moreau. Some argue your incident is an isolated case blown out of proportion, that you're using your corporate leverage for personal gain. How do you respond? Selena leaned toward the camera, her expression steady. An isolated incident can be an accident, but when patterns repeat, it becomes a system. And when a system is broken, those with power have a responsibility to fix it, not for themselves, but for everyone caught beneath it. I was in a position to act. Many others weren't, so I will act for them too. The clip went viral within an hour. Viewers flooded comment sections with stories of similar treatment. She speaks for us. Finally, someone with power is using it for good. At Heathrow, that same evening, a group of ground staff watched the interview on their phones during a break. One of them, a young woman named Tara, whispered, "Maybe she's the first boss who actually sees us." For the first time in years, they felt the stir of possibility. But not everyone shared the optimism. In New York, Victor Hand pored over balance sheets, calculating the cost of lawsuits, training, and compensation funds. He muttered to a colleague, "She's gambling with billions." What if this spiral doesn't stop? The colleague only shrugged. What if it's the only way to survive? Meanwhile, Clara Voss sat in her apartment, blinds drawn, scrolling through an endless stream of messages. Some condemned her ruthlessly, calling her a racist, a disgrace. Others defended her, claiming she was a scapegoat. Clara herself felt torn. Had she treated Selena differently? Yes. Had she believed she could get away with it? Also yes. The mirror was not kind. At dawn, Selena awoke to find an email waiting in her inbox. It was short, unsigned, clearly written in haste. "You don't know me, but I work at Silverwing. For years I've seen bias infect our service. You are shaking the system. Don't stop. Some of us are with you, even if we can't say it out loud." She stared at the message, her chest tightening. Anonymous voices. Fragments of solidarity in the shadows. This was how change always began. Quiet at first, then louder, then unstoppable. By the end of the week, the airline's internal network logged thousands of new complaints from staff and passengers alike. What once had been buried was now pouring out, undeniable, uncontainable. Selena studied the data as if it were the pulse of a living body. The body was sick. Yes, but now it could heal. She turned to Allison Rowe, her board secretary, who had flown in overnight. "Allison, draft me a framework for a new reporting system. Real-time, transparent, unfiltered. Every complaint should reach the board within 24 hours. Allison raised an eyebrow. That will terrify management. Selina smiled faintly. Good. Fear will make them listen. Then fairness will make them change. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, London gray and heavy. But inside, Selina's resolve was crystalline. The viral backlash had turned the skies stormy. The internal revolt threatened turbulence. But turbulence, she reminded herself, was not the end of flight. It was the test of whether wings could truly hold. The skyline of New York shimmered in late afternoon haze as Selina Moreau's car crossed the Queensboro Bridge. Traffic crawled, horns blared, but she barely noticed. Her mind replayed the words she had spoken in London, truths now echoing across headlines. Yet here, back at Aurelia Group's Glass and Steel headquarters on Madison Avenue, applause gave way to confrontation. She stepped from the car in her dark navy suit, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. A crowd had gathered outside employees, journalists, protesters. Some carried signs that read, "Thank you, Selina," with hastily painted wings. Others waved placards shouting, "Save silver wing jobs and stop the witch hunt." Their chants tangled in the humid air, competing rhythms of support and resentment. Security ushered her through the revolving doors into a lobby where tension hung heavier than the marble columns. A massive LED screen played financial news. Silverwing's stock line pulsed red, down another 3% since morning. Her reflection overlaid the numbers as if daring her to answer whether the fall was her fault or the system's. Upstairs, on the 39th floor, the boardroom buzzed. George Langford, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, stood at the head of the table. Evelyn Price leafed through a stack of legal drafts. Victor Hahn tapped his pen against spreadsheets. Other directors whispered in clusters. The union had demanded representation in this emergency session, and two of their leaders, Janet Cole and Richard Murphy, sat stiff-backed in the corner, arms folded. "Selina," George greeted, his voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. "We're glad you made it back. We have much to resolve." She removed her sunglasses slowly, placing them beside her folder. "Let's resolve it. Then." The first presentation belonged to Victor. He projected numbers across the screen, projected losses, cancellation costs, training expenses, potential litigation. "If we follow through with your proposals, independent complaint unit, transparency dashboard, mandatory retraining, we're looking at a $200 million impact this fiscal year. That's without considering reputational drag. Investors are calling me hourly." Selina leaned back in her chair. "And how much will it cost if passengers keep believing we don't treat them equally? What's the price tag on lost trust?" Victor, "Because that's the balance sheet I'm reading." Janet Cole, the union rep, interjected, "With respect, Ms. Moreau, our members are terrified. They feel scapegoated. 4 suspensions already. Rumors of more. People are asking, will every small mistake now end their careers?" Selina turned toward her, voice measured. "This is not about small mistakes. This is about patterns, about choices shaped by prejudice. My own experience was not the first. It was the one that finally reached the light. And you know that as well as I do." Richard Murphy, the second rep, shook his head. "Maybe so. But culture doesn't change overnight. You push this hard, you'll break morale." Selina's eyes softened, though her tone held steel. Morale built on silence is not morale. It's complicity, and I will not protect complicity. The room hushed. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Evelyn cleared her throat, sliding a document forward. We've identified prior complaints, 12 cases in the last year where passengers alleged discriminatory treatment. None were escalated. The mechanisms failed. Our exposure is greater than Victor's numbers suggest. Selina scanned the document briefly before looking up. So the question is not whether we can afford reform. The question is whether we can afford not to. George tapped his gavel lightly against the table. Still, the union raises a point. We need buy-in, not just top-down edicts. Selina, what's your path to win the workforce rather than alienate it? She inhaled slowly, remembering Marcus Lung's email, the anonymous message of support, faces unseen, voices unheard. The path is to protect the ones who want to do right. A system that records decisions, verifies them, and shields staff from pressure. Transparency is not punishment, it's protection. Janet crossed her arms tighter. Words. Ms. Moreau. How do we trust that protection won't become surveillance? Selina leaned forward, her voice low but unwavering. Because I will design it myself, and because I know what it feels like to be judged before you speak, to be measured before you move. That will not be the fate of those who work with dignity. Her words carried across the table like a chord struck on a piano, resonant and unignorable. Victor, still unconvinced, pressed again. Even if your principles hold, the market is brutal. Investors demand reassurance. What can you give them besides ideals? Selina stood slowly, walking toward the massive windows that framed the skyline. I can give them this: a company that leads instead of lags. Competitors are watching. If we show fairness strengthens, not weakens, our bottom line, they'll scramble to follow. Investors who abandon us now will regret it later. That's not idealism. That's foresight. Silence again. She turned back, eyes sweeping across allies and doubters alike. George finally spoke. Very well. Let us vote on immediate next steps: establishment of the Independent Complaint Unit, publication of fairness metrics, and creation of the $10 million fund. Hands rose slowly, cautiously. Then more. The majority carried. Janet and Richard exchanged glances, then reluctantly lifted their hands too. It was not consent. It was surrender to momentum. As the vote concluded, Selina exhaled, tension easing from her shoulders, but only slightly. This was not victory. It was the first breach in a fortress. After the meeting, Evelyn approached her quietly. You carried it well, but brace yourself. The backlash inside won't stop. There are managers who will resist every line you write. Selina nodded, her mind already moving ahead. Then we'll make resistance visible. Let them try. Every obstruction will be documented. And once documented, it becomes evidence. Evidence is power. Later that evening, in her office overlooking the city, she sat alone with her thoughts. The glow of streetlights painted the walls amber. She thought of the passengers she had met, the anonymous messages from staff, the faces in the crowd outside. She wondered how long she could carry both roles: the CEO fighting for dignity and the shareholder battling for reform. Doubt flickered. Was she driving the airline toward salvation or toward collapse? Could she truly transform a culture built over decades of favoritism and bias? Her gaze shifted to the framed photo on her desk. Her late mother, a nurse who had once been denied entry to a hospital ward because a guard thought she didn't belong. The memory burned like a brand. Her mother had endured quietly. Selina would not. The phone buzzed. It was Allison Rowe. Selina. The press is asking for a statement after the vote. Draft it, Selina said softly, then paused. No, I'll write it myself. She picked up a pen, letting the words form with deliberate care. Today marks not the end of a storm, but the beginning of a course correction. Silverwing Airlines will no longer tolerate the shadows of bias. Transparency is our new altitude, fairness our compass. We may face turbulence, but we will not descend. When she finished, she felt something shift inside. Resolve tightening like the fuselage of an aircraft tested by pressure, yet holding firm. Outside her window, the city glittered with a million lights. She imagined each one as a passenger boarding a plane, hoping only for fairness, dignity, and safety. And she vowed silently but fiercely that none of those lights would be extinguished by contempt again. The following week unfolded like a chess game in which half the pieces were determined to block their own king. Inside Silverwing Airlines, managers whispered in corridors, exchanged knowing looks, and let emails pile up unanswered. Policies that had passed the board vote only days earlier suddenly seemed to drown in delays. Approval chains lengthened, excuses multiplied. The system update isn't ready. Legal needs another review. Operations can't retrain crew during peak season. Selena Moreau watched the patterns carefully. To the untrained eye, it was bureaucratic friction. To her, it was sabotage. Resistance cloaked in procedure. She'd seen it before in hostile takeovers, in companies where entrenched leaders fought to protect their kingdoms of habit. This time, the battlefield wasn't revenue projections or market shares. It was fairness itself. On Tuesday morning, she convened her core allies, Evelyn Price, Allison Rowe, and Martin Hale. The European director now flown in for reinforcement inside her New York office. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, bouncing off the polished wood table. "They're dragging their feet," Selena said flatly, "which means they think delay will kill momentum. They believe the press cycle will shift, that the public will forget." Martin frowned. "And if the numbers fall further, shareholders may beg for a reset. Some might even demand your removal." Evelyn tapped her pen against a folder. "Then we don't wait for compliance. We create accountability so visible they cannot bury it. Transparency was your promise. Time to prove it." Selena leaned forward, her hands clasped. "Then we publish every step, daily. Public dashboards, internal reports leaked if necessary. They can't sabotage what's already in the light." That afternoon, she authorized the launch of FlyFair Now, a web portal tracking every discrimination complaint, updated in real time. It bypassed layers of management and reported directly to her office. Staff who once whispered about retaliation suddenly had a new channel. Within 24 hours, 57 reports appeared, ranging from subtle seat reassignments to overtly biased remarks. Some were minor, others damning. The media seized on it instantly. Headlines blared. "Silverwing goes transparent complaints posted live." Commentators debated whether it was bold leadership or corporate suicide. Talk shows filled with passengers sharing stories, some tearful, some angry. Selena watched a late-night broadcast in her hotel suite, her reflection faint in the screen's glow. A woman described being told to stand aside at boarding while others streamed past. Another man recalled being skipped twice for drink service until a white passenger intervened. Selena's chest tightened. She remembered her own glass of orange juice, handed with a smile that cut deeper than any insult. The next morning, pushback intensified. Victor Hand stormed into her office, face flushed. "Selena, you've turned us into a circus. Investors are panicking. Lawsuits are guaranteed with this much exposure. You've hung dirty laundry on the line for the world to see." Selena met his gaze calmly. "Better laundry than corpses. Victor, better a storm now than rot later." His jaw clenched. "You'll take us down?" "No," she replied softly. "I'll lift us up, but only if you stop pretending the rot isn't there." Their standoff was interrupted by Allison rushing in with a tablet. "You need to see this. On the screen." Social media boiled with a viral video. A flight attendant, voice dripping contempt, told a young black woman to sit where you belong. The passenger's friend had filmed it, tagging Tom Flyfair. Within hours, it had amassed millions of views. Selena's heart pounded as she listened. The tone, the dismissal, it was the same contempt she had faced. Different flight, same disease. The press swarmed. Reporters outside headquarters shouted questions. Was Silverwing racist to its core? Could the CEO guarantee safety for marginalized travelers? Would investors pull out inside? Managers scrambled. Some blamed a few bad apples. Others begged for statements downplaying the issue. Selena refused. At an emergency press conference, she stood behind the podium in a simple charcoal suit, hair pulled neatly back. Cameras flashed, 100 lenses locked on her face. "I watched the same video you did," she began, voice steady but low enough that the room leaned in. "I felt the same disgust. And I will tell you, this Silverwing Airlines will not excuse, will not deny, will not minimize. That flight attendant has been suspended pending investigation, and the passenger will be compensated in full. But more importantly, we are accelerating reforms to ensure such treatment becomes impossible." A reporter shouted, "Ms. Moreau, critics say you're risking financial ruin. Is this worth it?" She paused, scanning the crowd. If financial survival depends on tolerating humiliation of passengers, then survival is meaningless. Fairness is not negotiable currency. It is the ground beneath every business transaction. Without it, we have nothing. Her words rippled across networks. Commentators dissected every syllable. Investors bristled. Unions stirred, but ordinary passengers flooded social media with support. Hashtags multiplied. Fair skies. Flyfair. Selena. Soesno. Yet behind the public momentum, darker currents brewed. Anonymous emails arrived in her inbox, threats disguised as concerns. Flyers slipped under office doors warned of mass walkouts. Someone leaked a doctored memo suggesting she planned to fire thousands of employees. Rumors swirled, feeding fear. Selena felt the weight pressing in from all sides. Alone in her apartment one night, she sat at her kitchen counter, staring at the city lights. Doubt whispered, "Are you pushing too far? Are you dragging everyone into chaos?" She closed her eyes, hearing again her mother's voice. "Selena, dignity costs more than comfort. Pay the price, and others won't have to." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she let them fall silently. Strength was not the absence of weakness. It was choosing to stand while weakness raged. The next day, she walked into headquarters carrying not just her resolve, but her history. She called a staff-wide meeting in the atrium. Hundreds of employees gathered on the marble floor beneath soaring glass ceilings. "I know you've heard rumors," she began, voice echoing through the space, "that reforms mean firings, that transparency means punishment. Let me tell you the truth. Reforms mean protection. Protection for those who serve with fairness. Accountability for those who abuse trust. Nothing more, nothing less." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She continued, "If you fear change, ask yourself, what are you protecting? Habits that hurt passengers, practices that shame us all, or are you protecting dignity, the reason we exist in the first place?" A young flight attendant near the front raised her hand. "Ms. Moreau, Will we really be protected if we stand up against unfair requests? Selina stepped closer, eyes meeting hers. Yes. From now on, the system will protect you, and if it fails, I will. Applause began, hesitant at first, then building, rolling across the hall like thunder. For the first time, Selina saw faces soften, shoulders relax. The union reps standing in back exchanged wary glances. She knew the battle was far from over. Sabotage would persist. Media storms would flare. But a shift had begun. Not in numbers, not in statements in hearts. That night, as she left the building, reporters once again shouted questions. She paused, looked into their cameras, and said, "This is not the fight of one woman. It is the flight path of an entire company, and we will not descend." The words replayed across television screens, social feeds, and headlines. Investors still fretted, managers still plotted, but passengers, employees, and allies outside the walls began to believe. And belief, Selina knew, was the one currency no saboteur could counterfeit. The storm reached its peak on a gray Thursday morning. Rain lashed the windows of Silver Wing's New York headquarters, streaking the glass like veins of anxiety across the sky. Inside the executive floor, unease swirled thicker than the weather. Selina Moreau stepped out of the elevator, leather heels clicking against polished marble. She carried no briefcase, no entourage, only a slim folder tucked under her arm. But her presence alone was enough to tighten spines and hush conversations. Word had already spread the unions were threatening a walkout. Managers were lobbying the board for her removal, and shareholders were split down the middle. Some hailed her as visionary, others whispered destabilizer. The revolt had moved from hidden corners into open corridors. In the boardroom, 12 figures sat around a gleaming oval table. Screens lined the walls, flashing news headlines, passenger statistics, and plunging stock prices. At the head sat George Langford, chairman of Aurelia Group, his silver hair illuminated under recessed lights. His expression was carved in stone, unreadable. Selina took her seat opposite Victor Hahn, the CFO who had become her most vocal critic. His eyes burned with restrained triumph, as if he'd been waiting for this very moment. "Let's begin," George said, his voice calm but taut. Victor wasted no time. "Madam Chair, colleague Silver Wing Airlines is hemorrhaging value. Since Ms. Moreau launched her so-called transparency crusade, our market cap has dropped 12%. Investor confidence is shaken. Employees are terrified of retaliation. Union leaders are preparing to ground flights. If we allow this chaos to continue, we risk collapse." His words tumbled like daggers, each one aimed at her. Selina folded her hands on the table. "Collapse didn't start with me. Collapse began years ago, when discrimination was treated as inconvenience instead of infection. I didn't create the disease. I'm forcing you to see it." Victor sneered. "A disease? We are not doctors. Ms. Moreau, we are business people, and business demands pragmatism. Sometimes unpleasant realities must be contained, not exposed. You're confusing morality with management." Evelyn Price leaned forward, her tone icy. "And you're confusing complicity with prudence. Markets recover from storms. They don't recover from rot." The exchange crackled across the room. George raised a hand, silencing them. His gaze shifted to Selina. "You've demanded reforms, and you've executed them with speed I haven't seen in decades. But your opponents argue you've overreached, that you've endangered the company itself. How do you respond?" Selina rose slowly, the folder in her hand. She opened it, revealing printed testimonies, photographs, transcripts of complaints. She slid them across the table one by one, like evidence in a trial. "This," she said, her voice steady, "is what danger looks like. Passengers humiliated, children told they don't belong, employees ordered to give special treatment to the friends of executives. These pages are not theory. They are reality, and reality always collects its debt." Her words hung heavy in the air. Even Victor faltered for a moment as photographs of weary faces stared up from the table. George broke the silence. "And what do you propose now?" Selina looked him straight in the eye. "We double down, not retreat. We codify every reform into binding policy. We tie executive compensation directly to fairness metrics. We expand the FlyFair portal beyond Silverwing to every subsidiary of Aurelia Group. And we sign an agreement public, irrevocable, that fairness is not a pilot program. It is our flight path." Gas rippled around the table. Victor slammed his palm down. "That is madness. You want us to handcuff ourselves to an ideal while competitors eat our market share alive. You want us to kneel to hashtags and mobs with smartphones. Do you not understand? Business cannot be run on sentiment." Selena's gaze hardened. "No, Victor, business cannot be run on contempt. And that's what you're protecting, contempt disguised as convenience. You think fairness is weakness? I say it is the strongest foundation any business can have." The room fractured. Some board members nodded, emboldened. Others shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward George, the arbiter of fate. At that moment, Allison Rowe entered quietly, carrying a tablet. "Ms. Moreau, you'll want to see this." Selina took the device and turned it toward the board. Live footage played across the screen. Thousands of passengers across airports in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles were staging demonstrations, not against her, against the old system. Signs filled the terminals. "Fair skies now. FlyFair forever. Selina speaks for us." The chant thundered through the boardroom speakers, echoing like judgment. Victor's face blanched. This is orchestrated." Selina shook her head. "No, this is consequence. You ignored them for years. Now they found their voice." George leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, he spoke. "The question before us is simple. Do we retreat to the shadows, or do we chart a new course? The vote will decide. One by one, board members cast their decisions. Some hesitated, some spoke firmly. Evelyn's voice rang clear. Yes, for reform. Victor spat his no. Others followed, the tally climbing, tension slicing the air. When it ended, George glanced down at the sheet, then lifted his gaze to the room. By a margin of 7-5, the board approves Ms. Moreau's proposals, effective immediately. The gavel struck wood. The sound was final, sharp, like the closing of an era. Victor's face twisted in fury. "You've doomed us," he hissed. Selina gathered her folder calmly. "No, Victor, I've freed us. But you wouldn't understand. You've never flown in economy." The remark struck deeper than any insult. Victor's mouth opened, then closed, words stolen by truth. As the meeting adjourned, George caught Selina's arm. His eyes, so often veiled, now carried a glimmer of something rare respect. "You've forced us into turbulence," he murmured, "but maybe turbulence is what keeps a plane from stalling." Selina allowed herself a faint smile. "As long as we land in fairness, the turbulence is worth it." That evening, she stood before the press once more, flanked by Evelyn and Allison. The rain had cleared, leaving the city glistening under a pale sunset. cameras whirred as she announced the board's decision. Silver Wing Airlines is not retreating. We are advancing. Today, fairness is no longer a policy. It is law within this company. Executives will answer to it, managers will be measured by it, and passengers will benefit from it. Let this be clear, the skies belong to everyone. Equally. Applause erupted from reporters, not the detached claps of professionals, but genuine, almost personal approval. Selina stepped back from the podium, her heart heavy yet unbowed. She knew tomorrow would bring fresh battles, lawsuits, media spin, sabotage in new forms. But tonight, she had secured the compass. As she walked back inside, Allison whispered, "You realize you just changed the definition of leadership." Selina exhaled slowly. "No." I reminded them what it always should have meant. The morning after the vote, New York woke to headlines that spread like wildfire across screens and newspapers. Silver Wing Airlines codifies fairness into law. Images of Selina Moreau, standing tall before a sea of microphones, flooded the front pages. Commentators debated, analysts speculated. But ordinary people, the millions who boarded planes every day, spoke with one voice. At airports across the country, passengers carried signs of support. Flight attendants pinned ribbons to their uniforms, not because management ordered it, but because they chose to. Social media timelines pulsed with hashtags, Ducons Fair Skies. Ye fly fair forever. What had begun as one woman's humiliation had become a movement. Inside Silver Wing headquarters, the atmosphere transformed almost overnight. Where silence had once protected bias, now transparency ruled. The lobby featured towering digital screens displaying live fairness metrics, customer satisfaction, complaint response times, diversity in promotions. Anyone from janitors to executives could see the numbers. It was accountability made visible. Selina walked through those doors quietly, as she often did. But employees stopped her now, not with suspicion, but with gratitude. A young gate agent approached nervously, holding out a handwritten note. "Miss Moreau," she whispered, "I used to be scared to speak up when supervisors pressured me to bend rules for their friends. Now I know the system protects me. Thank you." Selina read the note later in her office. Alone. It was small, almost childlike in its simplicity, but it struck deeper than any balance sheet. It was proof that fairness had moved from policy into practice. But transformation didn't stop at Silver Wing. Within weeks, other airlines, some rivals, some international partners reached out, wary at first, then eager. They had seen the storm Selina survived and realized it was better to fly with the wind than against it. At a press conference in Geneva, Selina unveiled the Open Skies Fairness Alliance, a coalition of airlines committed to transparency and equity. The room erupted in flashes as CEOs from Asia, Europe, and Africa signed the agreement beside her. "Competition does not excuse cruelty," she declared, "and profit does not permit prejudice. Today we say, together, that the skies are not reserved for some, they belong to all." The applause was thunderous, but it was what came after that cemented the legacy. Governments began to take notice. Legislators in Washington drafted what soon became known as the Moreau Act, mandating baseline fairness standards for every airline operating on U.S. soil. Similar measures rippled through the European Union, Canada, and parts of Asia. What had been born in Seat 3A now spanned continents. Back in New York, Selina sat in her office late one night, the city lights glittering like scattered stars outside the window. She opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph, her economy seat from that humiliating flight. Seat 17B. A pale plastic tray table, A lukewarm glass of orange juice. The memory still stung, but it also fueled her. She taped the photo above her desk, not as a wound, but as a compass. Her phone buzzed. A video message from Johannesburg appeared, a young flight attendant, eyes wide with pride. Ms. Moreau. Today, I refused a passenger's demand to downgrade another traveler. I did it because the system gave me strength. Thank you. Selena smiled softly. She replied, "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for choosing fairness when it mattered." In the months that followed, cultural shifts began to show in ways numbers could barely capture. Passengers noticed small but profound changes: flight attendants who asked instead of assumed, check-in agents who verified without suspicion, supervisors who treated every complaint as equal. An elderly man wrote in a letter, "For the first time in 40 years of flying, I felt like more than a seat number. I felt respected." At the first Fair Skies Gala in London, Silverwing honored employees who had championed equality in the face of pressure. One group of attendants had defended a disabled passenger when another traveler demanded she be moved. They received a standing ovation. Selena, on stage in a simple white dress, told the room they didn't act because I was watching. They acted because fairness is now the instinct, not the exception. She paused, scanning the room filled with leaders, employees, passengers, and activists. 6 months ago, many of you were part of the problem. Today, you are part of the solution. That is what change looks like. But even as she celebrated, Selena knew the work was unfinished. Bias did not vanish with signatures or slogans. It lived in habits, in glances, in choices made when no one was watching. Her mission was not to declare victory, but to keep the system vigilant. 2 years after that fateful flight, the transformation was undeniable. The Customer Bill of Rights was printed on every e-ticket and boarding pass. Complaints of discrimination had dropped by more than 70%. Silverwing's Net Promoter Score soared to historic highs, and revenue followed. But more than profit, it was trust that had returned. At a global aviation summit in Singapore, Selena delivered a keynote address. She stood before thousands of delegates, her voice steady, carrying across the hall. Real power is not sitting in the first seat on a plane. Real power is ensuring that every seat, in every cabin, belongs equally to whoever holds the ticket. Dignity is not a privilege. It is the baseline. And once you make it the baseline, you will never go back. The audience rose in applause. Some wiped tears, others recorded, knowing history was being written in real time. Later, alone in her hotel balcony overlooking the runway, Selena watched jets take off into the golden dusk. Each one carried passengers who would never know her name, never know the battle fought in boardrooms and headlines to protect their dignity. And that was enough. Change did not need recognition. It needed permanence. Her thoughts drifted back to that humiliating day when she had been told to move for someone deemed more deserving. The sting still lived in her memory, but now it no longer burned it illuminated. It was proof that even injustice, when met with courage, could become the spark for transformation. Behind her, her phone buzzed again. A message from George Langford, the chairman who had once doubted her, now her ally. "You were right. Turbulence was what we needed. Thank you for forcing us to fly true." Selena typed back only 2 words. "Thank fairness." She placed the phone down, inhaled the crisp night air, and let the roar of another departing aircraft wash over her. It sounded not like chaos, but like a promise steady, unshakable, endless. In the years to come, students would study her story in business schools. Activists would cite her speeches, and airlines would copy her reforms. But for Selena Moreau, the legacy was simpler. It was in the quiet smiles of strangers boarding planes, free from the weight of suspicion. It was in the child offered a seat without a second glance. It was in the knowledge that dignity had taken flight and would not land again, because fairness, once airborne, belongs to everyone. And so, what began with a stolen seat ended with a movement that reshaped the skies. Selena Moreau refused to be silent, and in doing so, she gave voice to millions who had endured the quiet sting of discrimination. Her dignity became a compass, guiding not only an airline but an entire industry toward fairness and respect. But let's be clear, this is not just about one CEO or one flight. It's about each of us. Every time we board a plane, walk into a workplace, or step into a room where our worth is questioned, will we accept injustice as normal? Or will we, like Selena, turn that moment into change? Her story reminds us that fairness is not charity. It's a necessity. That true justice is not measured in apologies, but in systems rebuilt to honor every person equally. As you sit with this story, carry it with you. Let it remind you to stand tall, to value dignity, and to hold others accountable when respect is denied. If this touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can keep these stories alive and make sure the skies and the world beneath them remain fair for everyone.